Winter, Alsace. One fighter on a burning M10, and with a telephone receiver aims artillery, and from 50 BMG foils the attack of 6 tanks, saving the company. The article analyzes myths and truth, including the shadow of 1918. Right. January 40. 5th in Alsace is not a postcard with frost, but a viscous, salty cold that makes joints ache and metal stops obeying. The snow is not deep, but the crust cuts through boots, and the ground beneath it is frozen so that any shovel turns into senseless torture. The forest slopes down in strips to the fields. Between the trees there are clearings, like corridors, where any silhouette becomes a target. The village of Holtzwihr seems to be a quiet spot on the map, but it is precisely such places that turn into nodes in winter that are worth arguing over with tanks and infantry. Intersections of roads, bridges over ditches, platforms where supplies can be tightened. Here, the front is not a ruler on a blackboard, but a network of habits of the area. The American infantry, exhausted by December and the first weeks of January, relies on 3 things: a disciplined routine, artillery, and communications. You can't see the routine, but it's everywhere. Someone is always checking tired shops. Someone is tucking in a tent raincoat so that it doesn't pull from the ground. Someone is wrapping a dry cloth around a telephone wire so that the ice crust doesn't corrode the insulation. Artillery is not an abstract force on the horizon, but concrete batteries that are familiar from the voices on the phone and the way they ask corrections. A connection is a wire that must be laid from the bottom, pressing it against the frozen soil so that it does not get cut off by the first caterpillar turn or an accidental fragment. A telephone in an observation post is not a luxury or nostalgia for the old days, but the connection of blood with the heart. As long as the line is alive, the infantry is not alone, but part of a single organism. The German winter comes with the armor. This is not an avalanche of punchers during the campaigns of the 41st. This is an evil but calculated pressure. Tanks are not coming to jerk right and left, but to push through bundles of companies and platoons, impose moral fatigue on them, push them away from the roads. Infantry chains are marching, accompanied by armored vehicles, ready to occupy any bush that resets the artillery gap. On a snowy field, a tank is silhouetted, writing a black autograph with a ribbon from the exhaust. It can be heard in advance. And this is treachery. Fear rolls up before steel. Infantry learns to live with the sound of tracks, just as sailors learn to live with the hum of turbines. And they know that if you break up the attack step, separate the tanks and their cover, the chances increase. Audie Murphy's company settles on the edge of the woods and fields. There are no capital fortifications here. Trenches cannot be deepened into the granite of the permafrost. So every groove, every shaft of the road embankment become microstructures. The architecture of chances propped up by snow. An observation post is set up at the front, a little ahead so that you can see the clearing and the first line of hedges. There is also a telephone wire running from the box to the batteries, from the batteries to the card, from the card to reality. You can hear the hiss of breath coming off the phone when someone on the other end runs their finger along the grid coordinates. When they say artillery is the god of war, they forget the most important thing. Every faith has a liturgy, and here the liturgy is a simple language of corrections, cue length, angle, and time of approach. Short phrases that are understandable to both sides turn space into a tool. Infantry is assisted by tank destroyers. M10, low, with an open turret, without unnecessary romance, but with a reliable cannon and a clever idea. Stand, wait, beat the board, go to a new frontier. An open tower is not a whim, but a compromise in favor of visibility and mass. In winter, such a machine is vulnerable from above. Fragments and rifle bullets falling like hail can cut off the calculation, and therefore camouflage, position selection, and the ability not to talk the gun into overheating are important. But the very idea of infantry plus tank destroyers is an answer to how armor feels in difficult terrain. A stable firing frame that prevents tanks from dictating the pace. Holtzwihr these days is not a point on the map, but a mark in the head of every fighter. There is a road. There is a barn. There is a fence, behind which they saw a splash of exhaust. Everyone's picture of the battlefield is like a puzzle, assembled from other people's replicas and rare glances above the parapet. Visibility jumps. In the morning there is frost and a thin haze. In the afternoon there are highlights on the snow. In the evening the shadows stretch out into gigantic pillars of fear. The radio helps, but in a wooded area, when technology is saturated, when the air is overflowing with other people's voices. A wired phone still gives that degree of purity that decides whether the battery understands you at a glance or asks you to repeat yourself, wasting seconds. Who is Murphy by this point? Not a myth or an icon, but an infantry combat professional who knows the value of initiative and silence. The reputation of staying to the end does not arise from a burst of adrenaline. It is built up by previous episodes when it was necessary to hold on, wait, and take on the first minute of the incomprehensible. In winter defense, such a person becomes a fulcrum. If he says roll back to the backup, it means that the front has a plan. If he has a pipe in his hand, it means that a gap is about to dance over the clearing, and not just somewhere there, but along the path where the enemy has spread the chain. The meaning of winter defense is simple and cruel: to convert time into precision fire. Tanks in the snow are not so willing to turn off. Infantry is not so quick to rebuild. And the artillery, curtain, with proper training will always be half a step ahead. Therefore, the role of the observer and spotter seems invisible until the line breaks. If a wire breaks under a truck or under a frozen wind, the defense instantly shrinks to the size of its visibility. As soon as the phone whispers and wheezes, the batteries, like organs without nerves, stop playing the melody, turning the symphony into useless noise. That's why the memoirs of frontline soldiers so often feature scenes where someone, at risk, climbs to a broken wire, peels off the ice with a knife blade, and puts the twist back into the snow. This winter reminds us of one more thing. The morale and energy of the unit are the same consumables as cartridges. The company lives in short cycles. Alarm, check, coffee, silence, alarm again. In such cycles, the clarity of the order is especially appreciated. When the enemy is preparing a counterattack, you almost always have harbingers. Unusual silence, reconnaissance by combat on someone else's flank, rumors about a column seen by a local tractor driver. But the harbingers are not facts. The silhouette in the clearing becomes a fact. Then it is important for everyone to know where the reserve position lies, at what mark to open fire, who is covering the flank, which battery gives the near and which far. Holtzwir's combat context is a textbook on how a system and a person converge at one point. The system provides a structure, artillery tables, a grid of coordinates, an observation schedule, vehicles on firing lines. A person brings determination, to stay when others are already on their way to the second frontier, to put a cold pipe against his cheek, without dropping his voice at the first jerk of the caterpillars. Winter. A phone and 6 silhouettes is not poetry, but the dry mathematics of a combat day. You have minutes to turn a white field into a map of gaps, and black dots into goals that have lost momentum. When real tanks and infantry escorts pass through this picture, everything that was in advance, the wire, the batteries, the open M10 turret, the company's habits and personal readiness, will form into one chain. In such a chain, the weak link is immediately opened, and the strong link unexpectedly pulls out the entire structure. Ahead is an episode where one fighter will turn out to be the strongest link that will hold the bunch until the others approach. But to understand the scale of this effort, it is important to first see the chessboard of the winter Holtzwihr. The squares, the pieces, and the rule that the king here is not the king, but the handset connecting people, fire, and terrain. Dawn rises faintly, as if someone has erased the boundaries between the sky and the snow. There is very little time left before the first shot. This is felt by the silence, in which rare sounds become markers of time. At 08:10, observers notice a dark line waving in the clearing. At first it seems that these are bushes, but it moves against the logic of the wind. At 08:12, Murphy confirms, infantry groups with armor in the cover are ahead. He keeps his phone, gives a short order to take people to the reserve line and not waste a second on explanations. His voice on the phone is as calm as a metronome. At 08:14, the batteries already know the target grid. The corrections go without unnecessary words, only numbers and shorter further. At 08:16, the first breaks fall in front of the chains, raising fountains of snow and earth. The attackers are breaking formation. The tanks are turning up the gas so as not to be left alone under the veil. By 08:20, Murphy asks to shift the fire half a body to the left and 2 divisions closer. His NP sees one of the cars taking a step towards the potholes, trying to bypass the fence. The infantry buries itself in a curtain of shrapnel, then spreads out again, searching for dead zones between the gaps. The 10 appears in the foreground, the M10, which has advanced to the previously targeted sector. She manages to fire a shot at the car that framed the side, but in response she receives a blow from a gun hidden behind a hillock. The crew tries to move away, but the second hit breaks the gasket on the stern. A minute later, a torch lights up in the wind. At 0823, the stalled M10 is no longer a combat unit but a high iron pedestal, but with a regular sector, protected by a moat and a crease in the terrain. Murphy evaluates this faster than the thought is formulated. On a burning car, you can put the 5 at the optimal height. At 0824, he gives the batteries a new chain of coordinates to cut off the infantry from the tanks and runs over to the M10. Sparks rustle on the peacoat, but the wind blows so that the heat goes away towards the field. A large caliber Browning is fixed on the armor. A ribbon is attached to it. The position is high. The sector is clear. The leading edge is in the palm of your hand. The enemy infantry is trying to use the smoke from the burning car as a mask, but this is what makes their silhouettes more contrasting. At 0826, the 50 began to speak. Short bursts cut through the air, knocking out the crews of light machine guns and observers. Murphy is not trying to bring down tanks with a machine gun. He breaks the structure of the attack, deprives the armor of eyes and infantry shield, aims at hatches, sights, antenna arrays, and heads that stick out higher than necessary. By 0828, the enemy's pace was knocked down. The chains were forced to lie down. The tanks lost their bearings in the snow haze and dust from the explosions. This is the window Murphy uses for correction. 2 divisions to the right, 300 closer. The pace is high. The batteries respond with a steady base, and the leading edge turns back into a stockade of flashes. Several tanks are trying to push further, but without the dense cover of the infantry, their viewing angles and areas of vulnerability become more critical. Browning does not tear off the armor, but it unleashes a barrage on hastily leaning commanders and machine gunners, hitting the cracks to which hands with binoculars are reaching. At 0831, one of the cars stops, twitching, as if deciding whether to go or seek shelter. The 50 ribbon stitches its antenna and gleaming head at the commander's hatch. The car closes, and most importantly, it stops commanding the neighbors. By 0833, Murphy asks the artillery to shift the fire even closer. A risky approach, but this is the only way to finally separate the armor from its jack infantry. The phone crackles, the snow crunches, the machine gun box heats up, the recoil knocks into the shoulder belt. He deliberately keeps a short rhythm. 3 or 4 shots, pause, check the sector, turn again. Large caliber sound is psychologically oppressive. The enemy feels as if they are being fired at by several points at once, although there is only one shooter. At 0836, the battery fire goes a little deeper, along the second line, cutting off an attempt to tighten the reinforcement. There are orphaned detachments at the front, which do not dare to throw without tanks. At 0838, one of the tanks gets closer to the barriers, looking for where the 50 is coming from. Murphy meets him with fire on the scope and on Sparky's machine gun, forcing the car to turn away. He has no illusions about penetration. His goal is to make the armor stay alert, take away seconds and angles while the artillery does its job. At 0840, he notices an attempt at a flanking movement on the right. Several figures are hiding behind bushes, aiming for a gap in the curtain. Browning is transferred there. 3 short bursts knock out the initiative. The 4th forces the group to lie down. The sector is clear again, and the phone in his hand returns him to the coordinate matrix. Keep the same pace. Add battery B according to my label. By 0843, the tape is coming to an end. The metal tail is already visible on the edge of the box. At this point, the enemy is trying to play attrition. 2 tanks simultaneously move from different directions, hoping that one point will not cope. Murphy pauses so as not to waste the rest of his armor, and hits the chains that trail behind the cars like a shadow. The enemy's neighboring crew pulls a light mortar, and the tripod explodes in a burst, and the white field immediately ends in unburned smoke. At 0845, burning through the last dozens of rounds, Browning mows down an attempt to change the position of an enemy machine gun, then clicks dry. The tape has run out. Murphy makes the decision to withdraw without a tragic pause. He knows that he has achieved the main thing. The attack has not taken off. The enemy's rhythm is lost. The batteries are holding the fence at the right depth. At 0846, he gives a laconic, "Keep the same," on the phone, and rolls off the armor, hiding behind the parapet. The snow around the M10 hisses from the heat. The air is dense. It smells of burning and copper. He walks back to the line, where his company is already assembled and breathing in unison. At 0848, A short meeting on the run. Who's on the left? Who's on the right? Where are the grenades? Where are the machine gunners? The counterattack must be short and vicious in order to retake the sector and consolidate the artillery result. At 0850, they are moving forward in spurts, under the cover of the last volleys of batteries. The enemy is not ready for oncoming traffic. The plan assumed that the Americans would move deeper and close their eyes, and not that the infantry would return to bite while the armor was still blinking from bad seconds. By 0853, the first line of bushes was under control again. The picked-up documents and scattered boxes of cartridges speak for themselves. They tried to accelerate the offensive, but it broke up into separate, unrelated efforts. At 0855, the battery fire goes into reserve, leaving silence on the front with the occasional pop of single shots. The company fixes positions, carries out the wounded, picks up their nerves like things after a hasty departure. The result becomes clear without a protocol. The armor did not break through, the infantry did not gain a foothold, and the road remained in American hands. The defense note held up, because in the critical 10 minutes, one person turned a burning piece of iron into a springboard of fire, and the phone into a conductor's baton, synchronizing the huge, orchestral body of artillery. This scene easily turns into a legend if you take the system out of it. But minute by minute it looks different. Not a miracle, but the right decisions superimposed on the prepared terrain drawing. Murphy wasn't playing immortal or trying to beat tanks with a machine gun. He wanted something else. To break the coordination. To break the armor-infantry bond. To hold the space in which his company would have time to return teeth first. And it worked, because every, at 08, fell into a rhythm where the large caliber sound, the numbers in the tube and the snowy geometry did the same thing. Holtzwir's legend of the winter battle was born on convenient ground. It is based on a documented feat. The commander of a small unit held the defense node, coordinated the artillery, and using a heavy machine gun on a damaged M10, thwarted the attack, allowing his company to regroup and recapture the position. This fact is confirmed by award papers and museum reviews. It stands the test of time. Everything else is layers of meaning that have been building up over the years. Newspaper formulas, oral retellings, cinematic accents, internet memes. It's worth taking apart these layers not for the sake of pedantry, but to see the real scale of the skill. The legend is beautiful, but the accuracy makes it stronger. The first layer of the myth is like a machine gun, 50, stops tanks. In pure physics, this is not true. Bullet energy is huge for infantry combat, but it does not take the armor of frontline vehicles. The real targets of large, caliber fire are calculations, observers, commanders with their heads raised, sights, instruments, optics, and external elements thanks to which the armor sees and commands. That was the idea. Not to burn steel, but to blind and deafen the crews, to break the tank plus infantry coupling, to gain seconds for artillery and counterattack. Tactics have a prosaic effect, but it is what makes the defense stable. By turning a sober combat technique into the image of one machine gun against 6 tanks, the retelling loses its essence and increases the magic of chance where the training worked. The second layer is arithmetic. In war, numbers like to be rounded up. 6 tanks turn into 6 destroyed, although the source text records a foiled attack and stopped vehicles, rather than their mandatory destruction. This is a typical optics of a frontline experience. The participant remembers the ultimate sense of danger, and the legitimate delight that danger has crept away. It is convenient for the journalist and the viewer to reduce this to the tangible metric of how many burned down. In fact, the value of Murphy's decision lies elsewhere. He put the enemy in uncertainty mode, forced the armor to act cautiously and disjointed, and this is almost synonymous with failure for the attacker. The third layer is the romanticization of loneliness. It's easier to sell stories when there's one character, one gesture, and one peak in the frame. Immediately, the effort was orchestral. A telephone wire, batteries, pre-targeted lines, a company maneuver to a backup line, a choice of position on the M10, which became a height and shield. The lone man in the center of the stage was the conductor, but not the entire orchestra. The legend erases the figures of the gunners, signalmen, and the M10 crew, who left a convenient platform for the 50 with their death. By removing them, she unwittingly belittles the human cost of this platform and the mechanisms that made minute precision combat possible. The most persistent parasitic plot is the useless invention of 1918. There are usually two lines of confusion hidden under this hint. The first is the origin of the largest caliber cartridge 50 BMG. Its origins date back to the late phase of the First World War, when armies were looking for means against unarmored aircraft and early tanks. American developments really started at the turn of 1918, but evolution led to a mature weapon cartridge complex only in the interwar period. By the time of the Holtzwihr battle, the Browning M2 was not a museum rarity, but a mature system that had been tested in air defense, armored vehicles, ships, and infantry. Equating the date of conception with the combat value in a quarter of a century is a logical mistake, akin to accusing a radio station of being outdated because the telegraph was invented in the 19th century. The second line of confusion leads to the Pedersen device, a technical experiment from the time of the First World War that turned the Springfield rifle into a self-loading rifle with a weak pistol cartridge. This thing really didn't fight much, and in retrospect is often called a failure. Sometimes, in a popular retelling, Pedersen is slipped into Holtzwir's story as the most useless 1918, and then, with the magic of another paragraph, they tie him to Murphy's feet. From the point of view of reality, this is incoherent. Pedersen against tanks is as appropriate as an umbrella against an icebreaker. The propped-up details create the illusion of secret knowledge, but in reality, they only muddy the chronology and cause-effect relationships. There is also a cultural catalyst for the myth, the screen. Post-war America lived by the need for clear symbols. The biography of the hero is being filmed. The press focuses on the character. The cinema enhances the dramatic contrast. Of all the cogs in the battle, the viewer can see, first of all, the fiery peak, a man on a burning M10, the roar of the 50, snow dust, and figures settling in a white field. Working on the phone, boring coordinates and battery corrections that are indifferent to the pathos are lost outside the frame. It's not worth demonizing it, and it's not worth giving up all the laurels to the legend. You just have to remember, cinema is not a textbook of firefighting, but a way to experience and remember. For understanding, let's go back to the documents. Why do myths stick to real-life exploits so readily? Because a person has cognitive habits. We dramatize the singular and forget the background. We simplify complex things into an understandable formula. We love a technological miracle where discipline has worked. As a result, there is a focus in the words, "One machine gun stopped the attack," although the real magic is coherence. An observer who speaks to the batteries in the language of the grid. A commander who knows how to give an unpopular order to withdraw. Calculations that keep the pace. Weapons that work in their niche, and not in fantasies. This magic is less romantic but reproducible. It can be taught, trained, and implemented. The factual core of the story stands up to strict scrutiny. The place, time, composition of the threat, the structure of the solution, the role of artillery, the nature of Browning's use. All this paints a professional, not a fabulous portrait of combat. Questionable layers, machine, gunned tanks, junk from 1918, a complete loner without support, can be carefully removed, and this feat will not decrease. On the contrary, it will become clearer. This is a lesson in initiative under pressure, a lesson in fire control, a lesson in choosing the right position and target. There were no miracles around the burning M10, but there was a high-grade craft brought to the crucial moment. Stories of this type are needed not only for inspiration, but also for learning. They remind armies that investments in communications and artillery pay off on the worst day when armor arrives at the front. They remind society that a cult of personality without a cult of competence makes us blind to those who hold a wire in their hands and bring dozens of inconspicuous actions to one point. And they remind every reader why they need to sort out myths at all. Skepticism next to respect is not coldness, but a form of caring for memory. The fewer artificial sparkles there are, the better the shine of real metal is visible. Next, it makes sense to look at the post-war fate of the image, how the feat turned into a symbol, and what modern retellings do to military plots when they are translated into the language of short videos and headlines.